When Judge Franklin Pierce called Emma Lawson to his courtroom that day, he thought he'd found the perfect target, a simple literature teacher who dared to challenge him publicly. He planned to make an example of her, ruin her career, and satisfy his wounded ego. But as Emma stood quietly in her burgundy sweater, clutching her notes, the judge had no idea he'd just walked into his own destruction. Emma Lawson tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear as she wrote "Symbolism in Modern Literature" across the whiteboard. The classroom of seniors watched, some engaged, others counting minutes until lunch. This was Emma's 10th year teaching at Westridge High, and despite the occasional classroom challenges, she loved every minute of it. "Ms. Lawson," called Jeremy from the back row, "why do we need to analyze symbolism? Can't we just enjoy the story?" Emma smiled, setting down her marker. "That's actually a profound question, Jeremy. Literature isn't just entertainment. It's a reflection of justice, truth, and human experience. The deeper you look, the more you understand not just the story, but the world around you." The bell rang, and students gathered their belongings. Emma noticed the school newspaper on a desk. The headline read, "Local Judge's Controversial Decision Affects School Funding." She frowned, remembering the community meeting last month, where she'd spoken up against Judge Franklin Pierce's ruling that had diverted educational funds to a private development project. Later that afternoon in the teacher's lounge, Emma's colleague Diane nudged her. "Heard you became quite the community activist at that town hall." Emma shook her head. "I just spoke the truth. What Judge Pierce did was technically legal, but morally questionable. Those funds were promised to education." "Well, you certainly ruffled some important feathers," Diane warned. "Pierce has friends everywhere." "I'm just a high school literature teacher expressing an opinion," Emma replied, gathering her things. "What's he going to do? Sue me for that?" What most people at Westridge High didn't know about Emma Lawson was that before finding her calling as a teacher, she had graduated with honors from law school. She'd never practiced professionally, having realized during her internships that courtroom battles weren't where she wanted to spend her life. Instead, she channeled her passion for justice into literature and teaching critical thinking to young minds. Driving home that evening, Emma's mind wandered to her grandfather, who had been her inspiration. A small-town attorney who defended the voiceless, he'd taught her that understanding the law was about protecting the vulnerable, not wielding power. The worn volumes of his law books now lined her living room shelves, a quiet reminder of roads not taken. In her modest one-bedroom apartment, Emma kicked off her shoes and prepared for a quiet evening of grading papers. The answering machine blinked with a message. "Ms. Lawson, this is the clerk from the municipal court. You are being summoned regarding your traffic violation from last month. Judge Pierce will be presiding. Please appear this Friday at 9 a.m. Emma frowned. Traffic violation? She had received a minor ticket for a rolling stop 3 weeks ago, but had already paid the fine online. There should be nothing to appear for. A small knot of unease formed in her stomach as she remembered the judge's cold eyes at the town hall meeting, staring directly at her as she spoke. "Strange," she muttered, reaching for her laptop to check the payment confirmation. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of Judge Pierce's carefully crafted plan. Judge Franklin Pierce's chambers exuded authority. Mahogany bookshelves lined with leather-bound law volumes, certificates of distinction framed in gold, and a massive desk that made visitors feel small by design. He adjusted his tie as he reviewed Emma Lawson's file, a thin smile creasing his otherwise stern face. "Gerald," he called to his clerk, "bring me everything you have on this teacher, Emma Lawson." Gerald nodded nervously. He'd worked for Judge Pierce long enough to recognize when the man had set his sights on someone. "The traffic violation summons was sent as you requested, Your Honor." "Good." Pierce leaned back in his chair, fingers forming a steeple beneath his chin. "She thinks she can stand up in a public forum and question my judgment, my reputation? I've sentenced hardened criminals who showed more respect." The clerk shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, it was just a community meeting, freedom of speech and all that." Pierce's eyes flashed. "It's not what she said, Gerald. It's how she said it, laying out legal precedents, questioning the statutory interpretation. She made me look incompetent in front of the entire town council." He slammed the file shut. "Who does this high school teacher think she is?" What truly bothered Judge Pierce wasn't just Emma's criticism, but the precision with which she had delivered it. Most citizens rambled emotionally during public comments, easily dismissed. But Emma had been different, measured, citing relevant case law, pointing out procedural inconsistencies. It was almost as if, find out everything about her education, past jobs, connections, everything, he ordered. Later that afternoon, Gerald returned with a thin folder. Not much to report, sir. She's been teaching literature at Westridge for 10 years, lives alone, pays her taxes on time, no criminal record. He hesitated before adding, she did graduate from law school 15 years ago, top of her class actually, but never took the bar exam. Pierce's eyebrows shot up. A law school graduate? He processed this information, then smiled slowly. Interesting. She knows just enough to be dangerous, but not enough to defend herself properly in court. He turned to the window, watching clouds gather outside. Gerald, modify the summons. Change it from the paid traffic violation to failure to appear for a scheduled court hearing. Add a contempt charge. Gerald blanched. But sir, that would be fabricating. The system allows judges discretion for a reason, Gerald. Pierce cut him off. Consider it a lesson in respect for our little teacher. She'll face either a substantial fine or community service. Nothing too severe. Just enough to teach her to mind her own business. And perhaps a lesson on her permanent record about respecting the bench. The clerk hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Judge Pierce had powerful connections throughout the judicial system and the town. Few dared to challenge him, even when his methods skirted ethical boundaries. Most defendants simply paid whatever fines he imposed, rather than fight a system where he held all the cards. That evening, Judge Pierce attended a dinner with prominent community leaders, including the superintendent of schools. Between courses, he casually mentioned his concerns about politically active teachers undermining community institutions. Specifically, he said, swirling his wine, I'm troubled by this Emma Lawson situation. Such behavior sets a poor example for students, don't you think? The superintendent nodded nervously, aware of the judge's influence over school district funding. I'll look into it immediately. Pierce smiled benevolently. I'm sure it's nothing serious. But teachers should focus on teaching, not criticizing the judiciary. Wouldn't you agree? The trap was set. By the time Emma Lawson entered his courtroom, she would face not only fabricated legal charges, but also professional pressure. Judge Pierce would make sure she regretted ever speaking out against him. The Westridge High faculty meeting was just wrapping up when Principal Stevens asked Emma to stay behind. His expression was uncharacteristically serious as the other teachers filed out. Emma, I received a concerning call from the superintendent yesterday. He removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. Apparently, you've been involved in some sort of legal trouble? Emma's confusion was genuine. Legal trouble? You mean my traffic ticket? I already paid that online. Well, that's not what I was told. Stephen slid a paper across the desk. The superintendent mentioned a summons for failure to appear and contempt of court. Judge Pierce personally expressed concerns about having, how did he put it, educators who disrespect legal institutions. Emma stared at the paper, her mind racing. This doesn't make any sense. I paid the ticket immediately. I have the receipt. I hope so, Stevens replied, his tone making it clear that he was caught in the middle. Because the superintendent hinted that this could become a contract review issue if it escalates. Emma felt a cold realization wash over her. This is about the town hall meeting, isn't it? The principal's silence was answer enough. Later that day, Emma found an official court notice in her mailbox. Unlike the automated traffic ticket she'd received weeks ago, this one detailed charges of failure to appear for a scheduled hearing and contempt of court for disregarding judicial summons. It required her appearance before Judge Franklin Pierce in 3 days. Her hands trembling slightly, Emma called the court clerk's office. I'm sorry, Ms. Lawson, but our records show you were notified to appear last Friday regarding your traffic violation, the clerk explained impatiently. When you failed to appear, Judge Pierce issued the contempt citation. But I never received any notification about appearing in court, Emma insisted. I paid the fine online. I have the confirmation number right here. The system shows the payment was processed but flagged for court appearance due to, let me see, irregular processing, the clerk replied. You'll need to address this with the judge directly. That evening, Emma pulled a dusty box from her closet, her grandfather's case files, and legal notepads. Next, she retrieved her laptop and began researching Judge Franklin Pierce's career history. Article after article painted the picture of a judge whose rulings consistently favored certain developers and business interests. The same names appeared repeatedly in cases he presided over. Most interestingly, in the 6 years he had been on the bench, not a single complaint against him had progressed past the initial filing stage. Emma's phone rang. It was Diane from school. "Emma, something weird is happening. Stevens was asking everyone about your classroom conduct, whether you discuss political topics with students. What's going on?" Emma's jaw tightened. It seems Judge Pierce doesn't appreciate criticism. As she hung up, Emma noticed her hands had stopped trembling. The initial shock was replaced by something else, a cool, analytical clarity she hadn't felt since law school. Judge Pierce had made a critical error. He'd chosen the wrong teacher to intimidate. "Two can play this game," she whispered, opening her grandfather's old leather-bound copy of Judicial Ethics and Misconduct. Emma sat cross-legged on her living room floor, surrounded by stacks of printouts, legal textbooks, and her laptop. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail as she circled patterns in Judge Pierce's case history. "It's not just me," she murmured to herself, connecting the dots. Pierce had a history of using minor infractions to pursue personal vendettas. 3 years ago, a journalist who'd written a critical piece about him suddenly faced audit issues. Last year, an attorney who challenged his ruling found himself battling spurious bar complaints. The pattern was clear, but subtle enough that most people simply paid fines or apologized rather than fight back. Pierce was careful never to overreach too dramatically with any single case. Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "Stevens asked to observe your class tomorrow. Something about curriculum review." The pressure tactics were escalating. Emma paced her apartment, legal strategies forming and dissolving in her mind. Fighting directly might protect her integrity, but could cost her job. Capitulating would mean allowing an abuse of power to continue unchallenged. Her eyes fell on a framed photo of her grandfather on her bookshelf. "What would you do?" she asked the smiling image. Emma picked up her grandfather's old journal, filled with notes from cases he'd worked decades ago. A yellowed newspaper clipping fell out, her grandfather standing with a group of community members who had successfully challenged a corrupt local official. "You don't fight power with power," she remembered him saying. "You fight it with preparation and truth." That night, Emma made 3 crucial phone calls. The first was to an old law school classmate now working at the State Bar Association. The second was to a former student who'd become an investigative journalist. The third was to the court, leaving a message that she would represent herself at the hearing. The next morning, Emma taught her class with unwavering focus, despite Principal Stevens observing from the back row. She noticed him taking notes when she discussed speaking truth to power in To Kill a Mockingbird. After class, Stevens approached her desk. "Emma, about this court situation. Maybe you should just apologize to Judge Pierce. These things can escalate unnecessarily." Emma smiled politely. "I appreciate your concern, but I believe in modeling integrity for our students. Sometimes standing up for what's right means facing uncomfortable situations." As Stevens left, Emma slipped a small digital recorder into her purse and reviewed her notes for the 100th time. Judge Pierce thought he was setting a trap for an uninformed teacher who'd stepped out of line. Instead, he was about to face someone who understood the law far better than he realized, and who had nothing to lose. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Emma took a personal day from school, claiming she needed to consult with an attorney, which wasn't entirely untrue, though she was both client and counsel in this scenario. In the county law library, Emma pored over judicial conduct precedents and procedural rules. The elderly librarian, Mrs. Finch, recognized her focus. "Been a while since I've seen someone research so thoroughly," she remarked, helping Emma locate a specific volume on contempt proceedings. "Most folks just Google these days," Emma smiled. "My grandfather always said real legal research happens in actual books, not search engines." Mrs. Finch studied her curiously. "You're not a practicing attorney, are you? I know most of the local bar." "No, just a teacher with a legal background," Emma replied, "and a situation that requires attention to detail." Later, at the courthouse public records office, Emma requested transcripts from Judge Pierce's previous contempt cases. The clerk seemed surprised by the specificity of her request. "These are unusual requests for someone representing themselves," the clerk commented, eyeing the stack of transcripts. Emma nodded. "I believe in being thorough." Back home, Emma created a detailed timeline. The original traffic citation, her online payment with confirmation number, the dates of supposed notifications she'd never received, and the town hall meeting where she'd criticized the judge's ruling. The connection was circumstantial, but suggestive. Her phone rang. It was Mark Chen, her former student now working at the local newspaper. "Ms. Lawson, I did some digging like you asked. Judge Pierce has quite the interesting pattern with contempt charges. They've increased 400% since he took the bench, mostly against people who've opposed him publicly. Nothing big enough to trigger oversight, but definitely unusual." "Can you get me the names of others he's targeted?" Emma asked. "Already compiled a list, emailing it now. But, Ms. Lawson, be careful. Pierce has serious connections with the county executive and half the school board." After hanging up, Emma reviewed her case strategy once more. A direct accusation of judicial misconduct would be dismissed without concrete evidence. Instead, she'd focus on procedural errors in her own case, establishing a pattern only if necessary. That evening, Emma carefully selected her outfit for court. A simple burgundy sweater over black slacks. Professional, but understated. No power suit that might telegraph her legal background. The element of surprise remained her greatest advantage. She practiced her arguments in front of her bathroom mirror, careful to strike the right tone. Respectful, but firm, knowledgeable, but not overtly legal in her language. Judge Pierce would expect a nervous teacher, intimidated by the courtroom and legal jargon. Emma packed her grandfather's worn leather briefcase with this meticulously organized evidence. Payment confirmations, citations, procedural rules, and relevant cases. Between two legal pads, she slipped a sealed envelope containing information she hoped wouldn't be necessary, but had prepared nevertheless. "The best weapon in a courtroom," her grandfather used to say, "is being more prepared than everyone else thinks you need to be." As she finally went to bed, Emma felt strangely calm. Tomorrow wouldn't just be about defending herself against fabricated charges. It would be about standing up against the abuse of power, exactly what she taught her students' literature often illustrated. Win or lose, she would face Judge Pierce on her terms, not his. The municipal courthouse bustled with morning activity. Harried attorneys shuffling papers, clerks calling names, anxious defendants waiting for their fate to be decided. Emma sat quietly in the back row, observing Judge Pierce's handling of other cases before hers. His pattern was consistent, brusque with defendants, deferential to prosecutors, impatient with explanations. He rendered judgments quickly, rarely referring to actual statutes. Most concerning to Emma was how frequently he interrupted self-represented individuals before they could complete their arguments. Emma noticed Gerald, the clerk she'd spoken with on the phone, avoiding eye contact with defendants. He seemed uncomfortable, especially when the judge issued particularly harsh rulings. "Docket number 47B, Lawson, Emma, failure to appear and contempt of court," Gerald finally called. Emma approached the defendant's table, feeling eyes on her as she placed her grandfather's briefcase down. Judge Pierce barely looked up from her file, his expression one of practiced disinterest. "Ms. Lawson," he began, his tone condescending, "you're charged with failing to appear for a scheduled court hearing regarding traffic violation, TR 2023-45892, and subsequent contempt for disregarding a judicial summons. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Emma replied, her voice steady. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding I'd like to clarify." Pierce's eyebrow raised slightly. "The facts seem quite clear, Ms. Lawson. You were notified to appear on October 15th regarding your citation. When you failed to appear, this court issued a contempt citation, which brings us to today." "If I may, Your Honor," Emma began, "I never received any notification to appear on October 15th. I received a traffic citation on October 1st, which I paid online on October 3rd. I have the confirmation receipt here." She slid the printed confirmation across to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. Pierce glanced at it dismissively. "Payment doesn't excuse a required appearance, Ms. Lawson. The citation clearly indicated a court date was necessary." "With respect, Your Honor, it did not," Emma replied, producing the original citation. You'll see there's no court date indicated anywhere on the form, and the online payment portal showed the matter was resolved upon payment. A flicker of annoyance crossed the judge's face. Ms. Lawson, perhaps in your English classes, you're used to having the final word. In my courtroom, I determine what constitutes proper notification and appropriate response. The condescension in his tone was evident to everyone present. Several attorneys exchanged glances. "I understand, Your Honor," Emma replied calmly. "However, I believe procedural due process requires actual notice before contempt can be found. Could the court perhaps produce a copy of the appearance notification I allegedly received?" Pierce's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This was not going as he had planned. The simple teacher was supposed to be intimidated, apologetic, easy to dismiss. "Proceed with caution, Ms. Lawson," he warned. "Challenging this court's procedures only compounds your contempt." Judge Pierce leaned forward, his patience visibly thinning. The courtroom had grown unusually quiet, other attorneys pausing their conversations to watch the exchange. "Ms. Lawson, let me be clear," Pierce said, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. "This court's records indicate proper notification was sent. Your failure to receive it does not constitute a defense." Emma remained composed. "I understand, Your Honor. Would it be possible to see the proof of service for that notification?" The judge's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Gerald, please provide Ms. Lawson with the standard notification record." The clerk shuffled nervously through the file before producing a form. Emma reviewed it carefully. "Your Honor, this form is dated October 10th, but it's not signed by any process server, nor is there a certified mail receipt. There's actually no evidence this was ever sent." A muscle twitched in Pierce's jaw. "Ms. Lawson, are you suggesting court officials fabricated records?" "Not at all, Your Honor. I'm simply noting that the procedural requirements for service haven't been documented according to Municipal Court Rule 7.3, which requires proof of actual delivery for contempt proceedings." The judge's expression darkened. Several observers in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. "Ms. Lawson, your amateur legal analysis is trying my patience. You clearly have a problem with authority, as evidenced by your inappropriate comments at the town hall meeting last month. Perhaps that's the real issue here." There it was, the connection Emma had been waiting for him to make publicly. She noticed a young reporter in the back row scribbling notes furiously. "I wasn't aware my constitutionally protected speech at a public forum was relevant to a traffic citation, Your Honor," Emma replied, her tone respectful but firm. Pierce's face flushed slightly. "Your attitude is precisely the problem. This court finds you in contempt for failing to appear as directed. You're fined $2,000 and sentenced to 40 hours of community service." He banged his gavel with finality, clearly expecting that to end the matter. "Your Honor," Emma said calmly, "I'd like to make a motion." "This matter is concluded, Ms. Lawson," Pierce snapped. "A motion for judicial recusal is always timely, Your Honor," Emma continued. "Under judicial conduct, Rule 2.11, a judge shall recuse himself when his impartiality might reasonably be questioned." The courtroom fell completely silent. Judge Pierce stared at Emma, momentarily speechless as he realized this was no ordinary defendant. "On what possible grounds?" he finally managed. Emma opened her briefcase. "I'd be happy to explain, Your Honor." Emma stood perfectly straight, hands resting lightly on her grandfather's briefcase. The courtroom remained utterly silent, all eyes fixed on the unassuming teacher who had just challenged one of the most powerful men in the county. "Your Honor," Emma began, her voice clear and measured, "I move for your recusal on 3 grounds. She withdrew a neatly organized folder. "First, there's a clear appearance of bias. You just explicitly connected these proceedings to my protected speech at a town hall meeting, suggesting this case is retaliatory in nature." Judge Pierce's face darkened. "Ms. Lawson, you're treading on dangerous ground." "Second," Emma continued undeterred, "there are significant procedural irregularities that suggest this matter was handled outside normal protocols." She produced a printout from the court's online system. The original citation was marked "paid resolved" in the system on October 3rd. Yet somehow, on October 9th, after the town hall meeting, where I criticized Your Honor's ruling, the status was manually changed to "appearance required" without notification to me. Emma turned slightly, making sure her words reached the entire courtroom. I've submitted a public records request that shows this is the only traffic citation in the past year to have its status changed after payment was accepted. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The court reporter's fingers flew across her stenotype machine. Furthermore, Emma said, reaching into her briefcase again, I've documented 7 other cases where individuals who publicly disagreed with Your Honor subsequently faced unusual contempt proceedings or procedural penalties. Judge Pierce slammed his gavel. That's enough. This is contemptuous behavior. Which brings me to my third point, Emma said, her voice somehow both respectful and resolute. Judicial Canon 2.2 requires that a judge shall not permit family, social, political, financial, or other interests or relationships to influence the judge's judicial conduct or judgment. She removed the sealed envelope she had prepared. If Your Honor won't recuse himself, I'm prepared to file a formal complaint with the Judicial Conduct Committee, including documentation of a pattern of using contempt powers against critics, evidence of procedural irregularities in multiple cases, and testimony from 3 other defendants who experienced similar treatment after publicly disagreeing with Your Honor. The courtroom had gone from silence to a low buzz of astonished whispers. Several attorneys were frantically taking notes. The young reporter in the back had stopped writing entirely, his mouth slightly agape. Judge Pierce's face had gone from red to ashen. Ms. Lawson, he said, his voice noticeably strained, where exactly did you acquire your legal knowledge? Emma allowed herself a small smile. Before I found my calling as a literature teacher, I graduated summa cum laude from state law school, Your Honor. While I chose not to practice, I've maintained my legal education. My grandfather always said knowledge of the law is every citizen's best protection against its abuse. She placed her hands flat on the table. I'd like the record to reflect that I've submitted evidence showing procedural irregularities, documented of a pattern suggesting bias, and formally move for recusal. If denied, I'm prepared to appeal immediately under the collateral order doctrine, which allows interlocutory appeal of recusal denials as established in Hampton v. County Court. Judge Pierce stared at Emma, the realization dawning that his simple intimidation tactic had backfired catastrophically. The simple teacher had not only recognized his trap, but had set one of her own, and he had walked right into it. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Judge Pierce stared at Emma before announcing a 15-minute recess. Behind closed doors, the judge's demeanor had changed completely. What exactly do you want, Ms. Lawson? He asked, his earlier arrogance replaced with controlled anger. Justice, Emma replied steadily. Dismissal of these fabricated charges, notation they were dismissed with prejudice, and your recusal from any matters involving me or Westridge High. She also presented a list of 7 similar cases deserving review. Upon returning to court, Pierce announced in a clipped voice that all charges were dismissed with prejudice, and he recused himself from future matters involving her to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Outside, a reporter approached. Ms. Lawson, would you comment on what happened? Emma smiled. Our justice system works best when everyone understands their rights, including judges. 2 weeks later, Emma discussed To Kill a Mockingbird with her class when Principal Stevens and Superintendent Davis entered. After class, Stevens approached. I owe you an apology. I should have supported you. You were in a difficult position, Emma replied graciously. Things have changed, the superintendent added. Judge Pierce has taken a leave of absence, and our funding has been restored. That evening, Emma found her grandfather's restored law school photo with a note, From your admiring students. Thank you for teaching us that standing up for what's right matters. She smiled, running her fingers over his law books. Perhaps education truly was the path to justice. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe for more inspiring tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Share your thoughts below. Have you ever stood against someone who abused their authority? Where are you watching from today? Remember, true power comes from knowledge and courage to stand for what's right. Share this with someone who needs this message. Until next time.